Hello, people. The Connecticut news locations and their family members and different natures of conjunctions to them, even their neighbors and their rules with the campuses, all natures of crime scenes, and police departments. They have wire crime acts and methods, mail crime acts and methods. They keep saying, "Oh, if you know anything about this murder, call in." They have collusions with the differences of guilt too, because as collusions at crime scenes, body dumping spots, all sides of criminal and civil cases, and the court's names, the police forms, and the news names, and the intelligence at or next to their place, the difference of the guilt there. Their roles at the same time putting the same sequence shifts, fake transcripts, faked and changed evidences as collusion slash S, also to keep screened in the future, then and past. The breaching methods roles with location slash S. So you can't call them on the phone. They already fake transcripts. Weathersfield police had fake conversations with me, faked me being at the police station as a kid and then as an adult. And when I was an adult, I went there. And I had someone else ask for a police report. They put a quote from me to my Saudi friend. Pretended I said it to one of the Mendez police brothers, who's all in Weathersfield police, involved increasingly with people at and next to Fox Connecticut News, with organized crime acts and methods, with Connecticut's courts. A bunch of people with child abusers, leaders of kids, first force, and other natures of organized crimes, criminal enterprises at the same time. They're not legitimately unmarked police forms if that's what they're demonstrating with the corrections officers and the judicial officers recorded, confessed, demonstrate, confirmed, involved. Also, guys, roles, faking ties, and natures of ties to me with complete strangers too, like a Joshua Julian is increasingly involved with people at Hartford Hospital. They have some sexual and medical offenders of kids involved with a Joshua Julian, and some inter hate groups and things like that, and counter hate groups as collusions relative to their roles with their family members, with a whole bunch of different countries involved at the same time. All the countries in the news have collusions with their extended family members at corners of streets, manifest in ways they don't even understand. So, but so they won't get onto paper because they've already been faking phone transcripts, faking kids going down to the police station. Retired Weathersfield police chiefs have all kinds of roles with all kinds of natures of organized crimes, intercities with other police departments throughout Connecticut. Also with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and various natures of federal criminals and overt criminal enterprises and private ones at the same time, involved with his co-defendant's uh, lawyer and their lawyer, Robert Chevalier, and he was warned by a Judge Winters or Judge Nations not to show up in the 2006 district court part of a case without a lawyer. But also they brought themselves involved with Fox Connecticut News with the FBI and Thaddeus Grabowski and people on and off Two Rod Highway and Hangdog Lane involved with the names Domain, and a whole bunch of people taught to them on that street involved with prosecutors and judges like a Brian Silver, involved also with a prosecutor named Soulsby, also with proven child abusers, leaders of kids first forced years apart, and people at and next to religious spots who are also involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, which is what that is. WFSB attached me to fake conversations with themselves and with the intelligence next to them, who are also in roles at and next to Fox Connecticut News, and with their sources putting identity theft, fraud, slanders. And the Bridge Superior Court, Harper Courts, and the District Court won't get anyone on paper. These are also people involved with violence and child abusers tied roles. I caught them were doing worse with the prison, with the principal they put in prison. Before that, I caught him with others and worse involved. He said he switched his name too with the name Mike Levine. A bunch of people recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, tied to a Mike Levine have roles with World Trade Center predicate acts and with the investigators of it, and his roles with a Town Line Drive and the shopping center there, and all along Route 3 are involved with people with conjunctions to it and to that, like the state judicial branch offices, are involved with people with putting predicate acts with facts in kids' databases and having people act tied to that. Mr. Abruzzi is also involved with them, with the FBI and others that are forging and switching names and all kinds of natures of organized crimes and sexual and medical offenders of little kids involved, including forced self-valid roles. See, they know all the parents are a bunch of fakes. They know all the kids are a bunch of fakes. They know that because they made them forced to be that, or they made them sense for the breaching method. In other words, you can't tell American history properly if you don't tell about how the breaching method used the difference of guilt. Like in Wethersfield, Connecticut, there's a witch trials place right next to Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Then and now, those places still have other communicated for them, for themselves and for our founders than they asked to have communicated for themselves, beginning with the fact that the only founder plural that we know the name of is James Madison. And then even when he was a president / chief, he still didn't have free speech. In other words, he had to classify for us how and why he and our founders did not have free speech. Even the rest of the presidents, they had to counter extort, like George Washington. George Washington helped them use that plan to go counter extort at key locations and to force people to become our founders. I mean, our citizens, our government, even though the slavery was forced entrenched, rules sickly distinctly against Native American difference, because nature is generated that difference. And nature made them couple with the founders who were colonists, with the founders who were Native American, that we don't know the names of, that agreed with and honored the value of the Constitution unabridged and James Madison's plan. They had to force the rest of the colonists, the rest of the presidents, the rest of the Native Americans. And some Native Americans, everyone doesn't know what to do. Not one person knows what to do. And when there's exceptions, no one will be honest. Allow that person to have unobstructed speech. I show you exceptions, like we have Black people's rights of eyes. We have means to discern there was a predicate acts with facts method there. Before, and then America's founders were born. Nature itself shows us that. It's good, we have to follow mandated law, though. But so you can't call the police. The police have collusion with crime scenes, even murders, untimely deaths, and body dumping spots brought up at the same time. Fox News has a bunch of people tied to the reported murder of Greg Kyler, even if it was made up. There are journalists involved with that, and their sources have roles with other relative body dumping spots and narratives regarding organized crime. And in other words, because they have organized crime groups and overt criminal enterprises and private ones, even when they're not in the cases, they have and had already had collusion /S with all kinds of natures of investigators, their family members, and campuses, putting predicate acts with facts in databases. Fred Grisey will tell you, otherwise he's lying to you. I never tried to seek him out. I only know him seeking me out to make confessions about his roles, and I never saw him around the people in my area. Just because it was around the same time they confessed and demonstrated. They have roles with the campuses and next to them, intercities, all ages and natures of them, including fire campuses and medical campuses. These are increasingly people with Hartford Hospital and the businesses and houses next to it, involved with a whole bunch of people tied to the same house /S, involved with people further with Whiting Forensics, with sexual and medical offenders of kids, and various natures of organized crimes, and putting fake transcripts with the interbranch switching and forging names, and with as time collusions with murderers, untimely deaths, including on Trinity College, on the campus of Trinity College. The FBI director has roles with a whole bunch of people from other areas who were planting evidences on my street trying to put fake ties and make fake natures ties between me and people I don't even know, and they'll tell you this. All exception nature show that they were how they've been through the years, making people fight with their neighbors, making people get along with them, so because they're screening their roles with a whole bunch of different countries, and they have the same problem there because there's a hyper foreign involved. That which had slavery non-distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies. This is also its evidence why and how we have not had this addressed. How sickly non-distinctly the North and the South there were rules with slavery, and then America's founders were born, and they didn't have free speech. If they say, okay, we're going to go against slavery, everyone would sense them because then they're in trouble, and they would have been hurt. They had to force people to break those, and it wasn't just, it was against all kinds of human differences. Everyone was an extent of collusion against themselves syntactically while pretending other, or sensing for the breaching method, anyone not doing that. In other words, we could observe this. Little kids could observe. They have been teaching the science is criminally foreign influenced. What the kids and the adults need to learn together is that they were teaching them hyper criminally foreign influence, and they are teaching it at A through Z as systems tactilitarian from the one that's communicating with its body being. Why and how there are completely different, independent species bodies, and each one is made up of a whole bunch of individual bodies, and all group differences are generated by that which is not us nor the other species bodies, but it is all things anyway. And that's one of the ways we can discern to an extent its body of value progression. The hyper invisible but still discernible that comes conjunctive / hyper conjunctive with all the invisible but still discernible parts of speech of English grammar, of other languages too. Even anything can be made up, like art. This is distinctly, but also it is non-distinctly, but it is distinctly the order of the finite, or the finite details. The order of what is active, or the group details, and the value of what is simultaneous, and or its complete nature. Everything shows there's a further hyper simultaneous nature. And I explained to this is what we are discerning. We discern why and how we need to appreciate more than one name for a verb. We're discerning the body of hyper invisible but still discernible. This is what we are discerning. We discern where and how and why. We can only appreciate subjects individually grouped and simultaneous to an extent. And with discernment of that is right where we can discern the hyper simultaneous. That same one, that is that one generating body and all group differences. We could generate group differences and make system about it and agree about it. Agree all of a sudden, countries A through Z agree. But as long as we're agreeing as styles, needs, natures, in other words, that are collusions where they can't afford to anyone to make the short words properly without changing them, or self-valuing predicate acts with facts already being and having been put in databases and exploited there or other places. And the difference of that too, exploited. They're only capable of hiding their collusions with all sides of criminal and civil cases because of predicate organized crime methods that are grouped, that are bound, and they were there before their inceptions. The Connecticut Judicial Branch offices and corrections offices, they increasingly have roles with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and Connecticut's courts and their family members and intimate ties with the Saudi attackers. They had time collusions with them interstates. People from Washington, D.C. What motivated it was their roles and is their roles each year, planting more, and each day, planting more federal evidences, organized crime acts, rules, needs, nature, methods. Whole careers are kept criminally foreign influenced. Forgiveness is because the discernment of the breaching method requires the discernment of everyone guilty at the same time, but also with it, and or blaming other things, others, ourselves, for example, and sensing for it. like you do. You change your fake with people's words when they speak about serious things, like how we have black people's rights of eyes. It means to discern organized crime and denials of it, screening worse at formal legal locations relative to the worst impositions upon our most, impositioned upon location, like New York City. Clearer than day, the suburbs were designed for torture, extortion, slavery, to be tactically denatured and be a landscape nature of theater. While more and more the only means to cause positive value nature progressive acts in nature is try to counter and overcome the negatives is to self was and is to self-value rules with criminal and citizens means and needs and natures of positives means to cause positive value nature progression acts in nature. Only as ones too and collusions with the negatives to keep and like where we are syntactical appreciation of things and keeping other things other themselves blamed functionally by a breaching method for what they like even using all truths to screen that too. Like about the shootings in Hartford, Connecticut, a lot of them would have been stopped and they would have had reliefs. There are people involved with all kinds of organized crimes under the guise of healthcare. They're involved with scams, not even healthcare, with the mental health, and ones with badges, and ones with gavels at Hartford Hospital. Involved with foreign and domestic medical families, putting fake transcripts, fake ties to kids and adults in their databases. Investigators of that too, with them on and off the state judicial branch offices and corrections offices, increasingly collusions with untimely deaths, murders, names next to body dumping spots, next to the murder spots, and timed use of that / they know also was various ways demonstrated to me and confirmed to me on Facebook pages. That's why they were taking my Facebook pages and making fake Facebook pages pretending to be. New Britain Superior Court made rape threats to me as passion crimes with former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, before and after the World Trade Center attack. They've been yelling out rape threats. People I don't even know their names. And some of them with the name KNER and KER. They're little fake tough guys planting evidences with police and courts, and little tricks lying about what happened with instances and what came first and what's actually recorded. These are wire crime, falsified police reports roles, identity theft, fraud, slanders roles of Wethersfield Police when I was a kid and when I was an adult. And these are also people that put me in fake conversations and that said I said that everyone's evil. They put me in fake conversations with all these people, and in those fake conversations, they said that I said that everyone was evil. And I know why they're doing that because it's recorded. In other words, I never said you guys are evil. You guys are saying you guys are communicating. You're all kinds of criminally foreign influence readings of reality too. You guys are delusions raw, including with doctors involved with sexual and medical offenders, with kids, with Whiting Forensics. At Hartford Hospital has roles with a bunch of people with the state police at Whiting Forensics since I was a kid. More and more, they're involved with people involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Where the Wethersfield Police to be, there's people involved with a food bag with a Daryl Chandler. He's involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders with me. People increasingly involved with the campuses like Trinity College with a Joshua Stryker and others involved with some girl involved with Ray Colo and my neighbors that used to live here. They were forced, tricked, and persuaded to collusions with all kinds of natures of organized crimes and untimely deaths on and off Trinity College. Even if they made any of that up, murderers were involved with the people next to it too, and with the probation officer of Mike Oliver to keep his mouth shut. And if that was all made up, his probation officer is against the law to fake that. He was recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with child abusers and people involved with elderly abuse and training the elderly. And those companies, too, they're private criminal enterprises. Our founders left declassified for us demonstrations for us to demonstrate about how they didn't want anything to do with the overt criminal enterprises, the private ones, the terrorists that were timed collusions with the difference of their guilt, or the witch trials places, or the people involved with the slavery north and south, like where and how George Washington really had to come to Connecticut. In other words, and counter-extort and force the rest of the citizens and the rest of the colonists to try and the rest of the states to keep going, try to get free. We're not free. You guys have our founder, you have our American history told, criminally foreign influence. This self-valued roles too, pretending not to realize with our founders' words replaced. And you don't even know who our founders were, but you know that they were Native Americans. We have that lesson replaced. That important principle of American history lesson that nature itself teaches us. In other words, 3/3 of our founders. Our founders are grouped with the colonists, and with James Madison and the rest of the colonists behind him and his plan. But our founders were also Native American with that. But they had his plan was to counter-extort everyone else, including the presidents, force them to get everyone on the bridge. They wanted nothing to do with slavery. No one had free speech. And there were internationally monitored conversations and questions to make sure everyone stayed an extent of collusion against themselves and everyone else. Otherwise, that body was sensed and threw themselves. That's what was sick there. So even with the French generals' help and George Washington, they couldn't count. They couldn't counter what they had to counter. None of those countries. England didn't have possession over itself. That's why people in England, I read in a book, that they cheered us when they heard about the American Revolution, because their country too was just like every modern country is, sickly distinctly, but also sickly non-distinctly. They're being hurt, and because the breaching method needs other things, others ourselves blamed for what it did historically, what it is doing now actively, and which is keeping everyone blaming other things, others ourselves, for what is maintaining. And while that's going on, the people of themselves are self-valuing they haven't been, because they're entertaining what can't defend itself logically, without entertaining logic influenced by criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence campuses being used to sense and to screen the breaching method through other apparent and real motivations. Even the real ones they'll use to screen what's most real. In other words, the breaching method is why and how they have left black people's rights of eyes out from subjects as critical as slavery. And it's why and how they got away with through such time. They allow people to bring up subjects like slavery, and then they have the audacity to pretend anything is left out from that. It would have brought up the witch trials place next to Webb Stevens Museum. It would have brought up how slavery was entrenched in northern colonies and southern colonies. It would have brought up how and why no one had free speech. It would have brought up torture. It would have brought up extortion. It would have brought up slavery, even against George Washington. And that would have brought up James Madison and the founders behind him and his plan. And honesty and what nature, perception of what nature itself shows us, would have brought up how and why our presidents, Native Americans, are our founders. And then further, as decipher of chief, but chief also president / chief. That's not to respect the Native Americans. No, Native American. It's just because Native Americans were part of that group with James Madison and his plan that was strong enough to counter those internationally monitored conversations, but not strong enough. They had to make everyone hide their actual motivations for why they did break the laws. They had no means to defend themselves, but relying upon the people at key locations that our founders counter-extorted at the same time to give them themselves to either to work with each other and help each other, or get crushed by the internationally monitored conversations of work criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists, and way worse in hundreds of countries shared here and there. Russia and China We were shared here and there. We don't have sciences that allow us to understand that because it was, is, then, and now. Sickly distinctly, but it's sickly non-distinctly too. Tactile terror from how nature has us shared here and there. See, we are systems tactile terror from nature as well. And they're pretending they could speak about serious things like nuclear weapons. In other words, they want to have nature debate. In other words, everyone's just saying, "Oh, this is the bad person," rather than speaking about the acts. And then at the same time, the same ones pretend that they're changing and faking why we're using people's names. They're sequence shifting, right in the World Trade Center attack context. All the people who have been speaking about the World Trade Center, pretending passions, emotions online, control their mind. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. Get me off the fake conversations about it with the WFSB and others tied to them. So they are leaking this. They increasingly have a Mark Violet involved people I don't know, and a Kerr family, and a DeMauro family, with and a Colal family involved with predicate acts in my street with Wethersfield police when I was a kid and now I was an adult, like with these Mendez police that attached me to fake conversation with them at the increasingly too. These are people with like a Colal family has a Scalora family, and others with the campuses like with the Violets with the Saudi Arabia before the World Trade Center attack. Before I knew my Saudi friend, she's recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with a whole bunch of different countries. With by the Wethersfield police, force checked her and persuaded her, also with former director of the FBI, and the courts, New Britain Superior Court, collusions with them, with places next to the state capitol and people next to the state capitol in Hartford, Connecticut. These are, in other words, they're going to speak. They're dishonest, and they say call police. The police have collusions with all natures of crime scenes. You see how sick they are with. In other words, they can't speak on current crimes or criminal. They have to cover up. They have to use everything that comes before them to hide the actual value of everything. And in other words, things for themselves. The difference of it that is increasing the outcome. In other words, they have already recorded themselves with criminally born influence, tactical delusions, route readings of statutes and precedents while pretending other. Right with a former police chief Centron, with his lawyer, with the roles with people with the name Peruta. I don't know them. They're increasingly recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with the former mayors from Wethersfield, also with some sexual and medical offenders and people involved with wire crimes, organized crimes, with the fire department. In other words, and with the police chief, upskirt nature. I recorded with other worse federal evidences crimes with them. Identity fraud standards. These are some people involved with the World Trade Center attack. Increasingly that are tied to body dumping spots in my fourth grade class, fifth grade class, and sixth grade class, and names next to the body dumping spots, who are increasingly also collusion/S, putting fake nature ties to me with people at conjunctive to the state judicial branch offices, and conjunctive to that, and the state corrections offices. These are also people with Washington, D.C., increasingly intercities with the campuses, and the names next to it involve wire crimes at the same house. /S with whiting forensics with a bunch of people, intercities with them, and interstates with state police families, overt criminal enterprises, private ones. Actually, they're not legitimate with anything they do. And their educators are increasingly involved time collusion with them. They're putting fake things in databases and acting tied to it. Interbranch refusing to identify themselves legitimately, refusing to get on paper since I was a kid, relative to why and how they're bringing up how they're using their whole careers currently foreign influence. Get them on paper, one name and sequence.